Hey guys, it's StingKnight. Today's video will be a complete hotbar layout and keybinds guide for beginners in FF14 dawntrail. Even if you're not a beginner, this might help you out. With that said, let's jump right in. To actually set up your hotbar layout, you want to press escape and then head over to character configuration, and you want to head over to the hotbar settings section. And then here you can then enable your hotbars and then they will pop up. And you can also change it to whichever style you like. So for example, you have MMO mouse, you want to have it to 3x4, something like that. You should also press escape and then go to HUD layout. You see the text is purple. If you right click on it, then it will become white. Then that means the bar will be in use. You want to hold shift as you're dragging these. And then there you go. You have 3 nicely set up hotbar. And 3 hotbars is all you need. And then you might want a 4th one on the side of the screen for extra stuff. So then you can go to element settings and then have a 4x3, something like this. And then right click it so that it appears on screen. And then boom, there you go. Once you're done with that, at the right side of the first hotbar, there's like a lock icon. You want to make sure it is locked. So then you cannot click and drag out any of your keys by mistake or remove them by mistake. So if you have it unlocked, you can quite easily just accidentally right click and then remove a key by mistake. Secondly, you also want to get rid of these numbers on the side because you can see that like if you accidentally click on them, then you can end up dragging them all over the place. And you're going to place them back in the correct position once again. So press escape, head over to character configuration, head over to hotbar settings. Then right here in display, you can select display hotbar numbers, make sure that's ticked off. You should do that once you're finished with everything. Now for the 4th hotbar, I personally like it to be shared across all my jobs. So what you can do is actually head over to the sharing section within the character configuration, hotbar settings, sharing, and then shared hotbar. So if you take that off, then it does not share between any jobs. But if you tick it, then every single job will have this hotbar, and every item in it or anything you put in it will remain the same for all jobs. So shared hotbar, make sure that it's ticked for 4 if you want to do that. But for 1, 2, 3, I don't want to do that because that's job dependent. If you're wondering what cross hotbar is, I believe that's for controller. So if you have controller, you can do it for that. But for PC keyboard, you can just stick to the top part. The first thing here is to understand that the ultimate angle here is to make sure that every single key on your hotbar is comfortable to be pressed without having to click it with your mouse or having to stretch your hands out too far away, which can cause inconsistency and just makes things difficult for yourself. Some people may say keybinds are a personal preference. In my opinion, some of them can be, but most of them are not. For example, the 0 key on your keyboard is absolutely not a personal preference. No one in their right mind should be pressing that button because it stretches so far away from your WASD movement keys. You lose the ability to move, as well as having to stretch your fingers so far apart. It will make things difficult for yourself to be able to consistently press that 0 key. Whereas there are so many other options closer to the WASD area that you can use instead, so why make this hard for yourself? So most of the keybinds around the WASD area is perfectly fine to use, and those can be based on personal preference. For some players, they may use C. For me, I don't use C on my hotbar, so that is something to consider. So let's talk about the keybinds first of all of my setup. So I use 1, 2, 3, QER, FXTG, and then mouse 5, mouse 4. You may want to include number 4 in this if you wish. I personally find number 4 a little bit uncomfortable, but it's still pretty comfortable key. But I find the other options better. The other odd one out here would be X. You may find that pressing X is uncomfortable. You may want to switch it to C or V, or even just have 4 in the front to replace it instead. That is up to you. Mouse 5 and mouse 4, I don't know anyone that doesn't have a mouse that have 2 side buttons in 2024. But if you do not, then you can use the other options that I mentioned. You can use C and V, or even Z. Z is a bit not the greatest, but it's there for you if you wish to use it. The reason is you have to kind of cramp your hand down to press Z, which is why I also say X may not be the best option. And not only that, you can also rearrange some of the orders. If you want to copy my exact setup, you can do that, but you may not want to have X in the spot that I have it on. You can move X to the end after G or anything like that. So the primary hotbar at the bottom here, the first hotbar, is going to be mostly full of single target abilities, weapon skills, and spells. The second hotbar is have a modifier, which is shift plus any of the keybinds we just talked about. So here would be shift 1. This one would just be 1. So shift 1, shift 2, shift 3, shift Q, shift E, shift R, shift F, shift X, shift T, shift G, etc. For this second hotbar, I have primarily my buffs, either my odd minute buffs or my even minute buffs, along with some of the extra skills that I will use for single target rotation, as well as my AoE rotation here as well. Now for the third bar, which is at the top here, I use a modifier of control. This is primarily used for mitigation, so you can see here Second Wind, Bloodbath, Feint, stuff like that, and any other random skills that I may use. I will also show an example of my hotbar setup for every single job at level 100 towards the end of the video, so you can skip to that if you wish to just copy exactly. Unfortunately, I do not have one for Scholar because all my hotbars got reset and I haven't really played Scholar that much at all. Before I go into more detail, you can change your keybinds by pressing Escape, which brings up System, or you can go to the bottom right of the screen and then head over to Keybind, then Hotbar, and then here is where you can change everything. As you can see, I have 1, 2, 3, QER, FX, TG, mouse 5, mouse 4, and then the second hotbar is Shift, the exact same as hotbar 1, but just with Shift as a modifier, and then the hotbar 3 is Control as a modifier, and then everything the exact same. And then same with hotbar 4, which is the Alt as a modifier. Now, I'd like to go a little bit more in depth. For example, on every single job I have, QER is always like the 1, 2, 3 combo, universally, unless I'm playing healer, which doesn't have 1, 2, 3 combo. So that is something I have on all my jobs. Most of the time as well, 1 to 3 is where I put my abilities, like core abilities that I need to keep track of, that I use in my rotation. So for example, you also want to put them in the correct order. When I play Dragoon, the first ability I use is always Gerskugo, which is the number 1 here. And then if always followed up by High Jump, and then always followed up by Dragonfire Dive as my third ability that I use during my rotation. So I have this at 1, 2, 3. It makes a very nice logical order whenever I do my rotations. Makes it very easy to keep track of things, and I don't need to overthink it too much. As opposed to if I have my High Jump at if I have my High Jump somewhere like here, then the order is kind of messed up. Of my Dragonfire at like here, then this is a complete mess. You're just going to make it so hard for yourself to keep track of everything. So, and mouse 5, mouse 4, I usually have any other extra ability skills that I need to use, or like a dash or a movement that I can use. And then for the second bar, the shift bar, shift 1, shift 2, shift 3 are usually always my buffs, always some type of damage buff. And then shift Q and shift E are extra keys where I have some type of extra ability that I need for single target rotations. For my AoE, I always have shift R to shift X. This might seem odd to a lot of players because you would think that it makes more sense to have a shift Q, right? But I personally just went with this for a long time and I just got used to it. You can totally change your AoE rotation to start from shift Q. But I like to have like a few extra slots from shift Q and shift E for my single target rotation abilities. So I just left it the way it is. Shift T is the weapon skill buff for Dragoon, and then shift G is true north for all my melee jobs. Shift mouse 5 is always some type of stun when the job has a stun. 4 could be anything. For here, I have elusive jump. And then on to the control hotbar that I've already mentioned. Control hotbar is always my mitigation. So for the first control 1 to control 3 are usually some type of mitigations. But then from control Q onwards to control G, it could be anything else. Since Dragoon doesn't have that many buttons, I don't have to fill this up. For control F is always my range attack for all my jobs. So any type of melee jobs, any type of tanks that needs to have a throwing skill, I usually have a control F. Control X is always limit break. And then usually control G is where I put my potion, but right now I don't have any. So when you want to pot in like endgame, this is where I have my keybind at. And then control mouse 5 is always my knockback immune for every single job, no exception. Same with sprint, control mouse 4, the exact same for every job in the entire game. Here's an example on my Gunbreaker. I have my invulnerability always at control 1 for all my tanks, and then control 2 is always the AoE damage reduction for the entire party, and then control 3 is some other random stuff. Control R is always shirk to transfer my enmity, and then same again, control F is my range attack. Control T is always my tank stance. And then for shift 1 is usually some type of buff or a job specific skill. So for Gunbreaker is No Mercy, on Paladin is Fight or Flight, on Dark Knight is the Blackest Night, on Warrior is Bloodwedding. And I also have Reprisal on shift 2 always for all the tanks, Rampart on shift 3, and then extra mitigations, I usually have a shift T or shift G. Shift G is usually the big tank defensive one. And one of the things that you want to keep in mind of is if you play a job like Gunbreaker, for example, your continuation, gnashing fan and continuation should be two keys that you can constantly, repeatedly press very comfortably. So for me, it's a T or F, and then combined with G. So I personally can press this really comfortably. If it's not comfortable for you, you want to rearrange that. So it's TG, and then I can easily access TG very easily. So here is another example. So if I'm playing Machinist, you want to make sure your blazing shot is comfortable to press along with your double check and your checkmate, because you'll be spamming these non-stop during your rotation. You want to make sure this is a very comfortable key to press. For me, F and 1, F and 2 is perfectly comfortable. So that is something you also want to keep in mind of when you set up your keybinds. Physical range, some examples. Second one is always control 1 for this particular job. And then the damage reduction for the whole party is always control 2. This is the same for Machinist and Dancer as well. And then there's some other extra party buffs or party mitigation buffs that you can have as well. For control R is always foot grace. Control F is always leg grace. And then Paladin is always control T. Now, I personally don't play caster that much in PvE. I find them have a lot of button bloats, especially on Black Mage and Red Mage. Some of the abilities that is shared across all caster jobs is not in the exact same spot. So you may want to rearrange that and not copy me fully. For all the Black Mage, I have my Swift Cast at my mouse 4, and my Addo always at control 2. And then Lucid Dreaming is kind of all over the place for me. So on Black Mage is at control Q because there's really not much else. No extra space I can have for my shift slot, really. And then on Summoner is at shift Q instead. Red Mage is shift Q. Pictomancer is on shift Q as well. And I also have Sleep mostly at control shift mouse 5. Excuse me. But on Red Mage, there's so many of these like dashes that I have to have the sleep skill on shift E. For healers on White Mage and Astrologian, I always have the single target heals on the first bar as much as possible. And I usually have the emergency heal, the one that can instantly heal them for a lot of HP at the 3 key on all my healers. And then Q, obviously the single target spell that you spam non-stop. And then E is always the damage over time spell. And then I always have the Lucid Dreaming at shift 1, slightly different from the casters. You might want to adjust that to match all the ones to be the same. So for the third bar I have, which is the control modifier bar, I always have everything as AoE heals. Always AoE heals or AoE shields or anything like that. As you can see, Medica, Cure 3, Medica 3, Asylum, Afflictus Rapture, stuff like that. And then on Control R, I always have Isuna. Control F is always Rescue. Control X, same again with every other job. For me, it's always Limit Break. So it's a little bit different from my caster jobs. For my Swift Cast on healers, I always have it on Shift Mouse 4, and then the Resurrection always on Shift Mouse 5. And then healers are kind of unique in FF in the sense that you don't have a strict rotation, and a lot of stuff is just has its own specific purpose. So you just have to need to know and memorize what that skill does when you place it in your hotbar. Now for targeting, press escape, head into keybinds, targeting, and I would recommend that you should always have target nearest enemy with your tab. I think this is default. I'm not sure if this is default, but this should be default. If you haven't done that, you should do that. And then next I'm going to talk about is how I target other enemies. If you press escape again, go to system, head over to character configuration, go to mouse, and then here mouse wheel settings, you can actually change this. So my regular scroll up and down, I have it to cycle through enemies. It is exactly what it says. You can use scroll up to cycle through enemies from nearest to furthest, and then I have scroll down from furthest to nearest. I find this particularly useful in like some dungeon runs where I have to make sure I gain aggro of all the mobs. Now I will say this is not exactly the most consistent method, but this is something you can absolutely try out. I'm not going to say this is like a definite and must-do thing for any new players, but I think it's worth checking out. And then I have zoom in and zoom out with the camera with Control Plus as a modifier. The cycle through enemies settings can be useful using the scroll wheel sometimes. Sometimes it's a little bit inconsistent. I honestly think it's better than wasting any keybinds on your left hand, where you can have this on the mouse hand instead. Also, when you go back to targets, you want to target type. You want to change the target type to type 2 cone. This way, when you're targeting, it will be where you're looking at. Whereas if it's type 1, it will target whatever is nearest to you no matter what you're looking at. I personally prefer using type 2. Here's another thing I would recommend is go to system, system configuration, and then go to mouse settings. Here, I would actually recommend having your mouse cursor as large. A lot of the times I find myself losing my mouse cursor when I have a normal, but when I change the size large, I've never ever lost the mouse cursor again in the middle of like a battle. For example, you're in the middle of a front line, you want to click on the enemy targets because sometimes you cannot just get to those targets with your scroll wheel targeting or your tap target. It just doesn't work. You do have to use your mouse. Perhaps in some fights it is extremely chaotic, you lose your mouse. with the large size, I've never ever lost my mouse cursor again. So this is something you should totally try out. There's also another method some people use, like when you press a button, your mouse cursor light up or something, so then you can find it. I think that's just pointless. Why do that? Why waste a keybind for that when you can just change it just to make it bigger? Here's another setting. Go into System, Character Configuration, head over to Hotbar Settings, and then here at the top, you want to change this to Type 2 Centered. So the difference here, I will show you in one moment. So this is what it looks like. You can see the number is extremely small, but when you change it to Type 2, the number becomes way bigger, way easier to read, so you can prepare to use that skill when it comes back up. Now for movement, once again, press Escape, go into Character Configuration, head over to Control Settings. Here in combat, you should always be using Legacy type. Standard type, that's what you use for role-playing, when you're chilling with some friends in game, perhaps. But for combat, always use Legacy. Now if you press Escape, head over to Keybinds and Movement. Here, I would recommend using the default settings, which is Move Left and Move Right with A and D. You don't need to change that. I personally prefer this. There's only one downside, really, when you have to deal with like a gaze mechanic. What a lot of people do is have the strafe left and right key, something like this, so they can spam AD while still hitting the boss. They can still hit the boss without looking at the boss. So that's the only downside with this setting. But if you do end up using strafe left and strafe right, you do have another problem. If you press D and S, you will start moving slowly. But if you go back to move left and move right, you don't have this problem. But your camera does turn slightly. So I personally prefer to move left and right, so I can freely move my character around without any restrictions at all. Feel free to try them both out. This is not something that you definitely should be using. You can try either option. Another thing about movement in this game you may already instinctively be doing is you can use your mouse, hold right click, and if you press left click, your character will move wherever your camera is facing. So this can further alleviate you having to use your WASD key as you're pressing your rotation. So that's something to keep in mind of. Now I'm going to go through every single job and show you all the hotbars starting from Paladin, and I may or may not give some extra commentary on them. On Warrior, I do have my inner release at G. I quite like the G button for me. It feels pretty comfortable to press for me personally. You may not want to have the inner release here. You can totally have the inner release at 3. Something like this, absolutely no problem. Or you can totally have your Infuriate at 3. Same thing, absolutely no problem. But I would keep my 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 combo at QERF. Something like that. This is on Dark Knight. I personally play Dark Knight the least out of all the tanks, so this may not be the best hotbar example for Dark Knight players. And then this is on Gunbreaker once again. I try to make this very logical for myself, so I believe at 1, 2, 3, 4, these 4 skills, you can use this in this exact order. So actually, I believe it's something that looks like this. So imagine Q is 4, then you can very easily, for every burst window, even or odd minute, you basically just repeat the same thing. You press No Mercy, you go into Sonic Break, you press Bow Shock, and then you press Double Down, and then you press Blasting Zone. And then you go back into your normal Gnashing Fang continuation combo. If you remove X and then add in a number 4 as your keybind instead, this could work perfectly as well. But I've personally gotten used to having X like this on Gunbreaker, and it works perfectly fine for me. Moving on to Monk, you can see that I have my Fire's Reply and my Wind's Reply at 2 and 3. This is just to make things easier for myself, so you can see the skill changes, so then I can press 2 instead of Shift 2. Same with Wind's Reply. This is a personal preference, you don't need to have it on the non-modified hotbar. If you wish, you can completely get rid of this and just leave it like that and just press Shift 2 and Shift 3 if you're more comfortable with that. Because Monk is a little different from most of the jobs. I have my 1, 2, 3 here. Now, I don't actually know which one you would say 1. I think Dragon Kick is 1 now. You start off with Dragon Kick. And I have the rear combo from XT. So T is the rear skill, and then R is the flank skill. That's how I've set it up. And then my G is the big damage skill once I have used my perfect balance. This is Dragoon. We've already talked about this. If you want to take a look again, it's here for you. This is on Ninja. This is on Samurai. This is on Reaper. This is on Viper. For Bard, you might notice some oddities here. For example, the buff songs, 2 of the buff songs I have a Shift Q and Shift E, but for this particular song I have a G, because this song turns into pitch perfect, so now I can just spam this. I like having G slotted in for my big damage skills, so I just use that for pitch perfect. This is for Machinist. You will notice that I have the resemble at X. Sometimes I just do that. For the buffs I have it on X. You can just as easily have this at Shift G or Shift 3, anything like that. I just have an X because it's more comfortable. And you can also have the hypercharge at Shift 3, Shift Q, Shift E, or literally anywhere I just have a mouse for. This is on Dancer. This is for Black Mage. So I haven't really played Black Mage for Dawntrail. I would actually make a change here. Just move Flare Star with Foul. Yeah, I would make a change to something like this. Maybe T or G, something like that. Switch it around. Because Foul is for AoE, and then Flare Star is for single target. Because Foul and Xenoglossy shares the same resource. This is for Summoner. You might notice something strange here. I have my summons at Control E, R, F. I just happen to have it here. I just actually find this really comfortable. I don't know why. I just like using it for in my control bar. So it's totally up to you. You can have it somewhere else. You can totally have this like at Shift 2, Shift 3, and Shift Q, and then move your Lucid Dreaming somewhere else. That works perfectly too. This is Red Mage. So depending on the usage of the buff orders, you may want to switch these around. So if I use Acceleration first, you can have this at Shift 1. I haven't checked out the endgame rotation for Red Mage, so you want to adjust accordingly. For example, if I'm using Engagement first, you always want to keep engagement at 1 then. That's your OGCD. But if that's not the case, if you use this at the 3rd order, then you want to have a 3. Something like that. And because the gauge of Red Mage on the left side is white, the right side is black, I have my QER, I have my ER as my white mana skills, and then FX as my black mana skills. So, you know, the white mana on the left, black mana on the right, kind of like that. This is on Pictomancer. I haven't really played Picto that much, so copy with care. Make sure to adjust any of the keybinds to your needs. This is on White Mage. This is on Scala. I'm sorry, Scala players. I think I said it already at the beginning of the video. I have, reset my hotbars, all my hotbars, and I haven't really played Scala that much. So you can kind of copy my example from Sage in a bit, which I will show. Astrologian, you can see the single target regen skill is always on F for me for both jobs. And then all the AoE healings is always at the control bar for the most part. Now on Sage, and then that's every single job in the game. So that's gonna be it for this video. If you found the video helpful, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more future FF14 content. And if there are any other tips that you have that I forgot to mention, please leave a comment down below, as well as if I've made any mistakes at all. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.